welcome to TJacks Unpacks. Whether you guys are watching this the day it releases or a few years down the road, I want to extend my thank you for taking some time to discuss and talk about politics with me. And I also want to send a little appreciation as well. This is the second week of the podcast, and we have already got over 300 views in week one. So thank you guys. That is telling me we are slowly but surely building a community where these are issues you guys want to hear about. And then another thing, and some of you who may know me personally know this, is I am an incredibly hard worker, sometimes to the point it's a little unhealthy. So I'm trying to work on that a little bit. But I say that to bring your attention to the point that I am committed to this work, and I promise that I will continue to improve each week and each episode. So please hold me accountable to that as you guys grow alongside me in this community. Now, today, guys, we are going to cover income inequality. Now, we could go all the way back to the start of the country, but really what this episode is focused on is the Reagan-era tax cuts to the present. But before we jump into that, we are going to do, as we always do, our quick hits of the week. So our first story is going to be the fallout from Trump's joint Congress speech. If you want my instant reaction, I did that immediately after he finished in episode 2. So feel free to go watch that. But in terms of the fallout, the speech itself is a lot of what you would expect from any Trump speech. It was largely performative, very little substance, a lot of lies. It's honestly, guys, he says his lies so confidently, you even question yourself. You're like, is that a lie? But it was filled with lies, and it was very, very long. My big message to you guys when you're watching any speech, it doesn't matter if it's a Republican or a Democrat, you have to do your best to ignore all the performative measures and listen to what the politician is actually going to do for you. And this speech had very little about what Trump would be doing to actually help the average American. Now, one of the big moments, and this was a Democratic bright point in my opinion, is when Al Green stood up. So he's a Democratic representative, and he pushed back. Specifically, he was targeting the protection of Medicaid. But instead of sitting by and being docile, he actually stood up and he showed some fight for the Democratic Party. Now, he was censured for this, which at the end of the day, really, guys, is not a big deal. But he was censured for this. But what I want to bring to your attention, I'm going to bring up the pictures and names now. There were 10 Democrats who also voted to censure Al Green. So they joined the Republicans in that vote. What that tells me, guys, is these 10 representatives on the screen are not interested in at all fighting for me or you. So if you are in these states and these are your representatives, I would strongly consider if they have the average American's best interests at heart, and I would consider primarying those individuals if you are living in any of those states. Now, still with the same story, there was also some polling confusion about Trump's speech and how well it was received. And CBS did not do a good job here at all communicating this to the public. So the speech, as you guys can see on the screen, had a 76 approval. And that seems like crazy high. But what CBS should have done is also put this poll directly next to it that showed only 20% of the people who watched were Democrats. So guys, what that tells you very simply is people who were Republicans liked what Trump said, and people who didn't probably didn't, which is the general trend. So that 76% number, guys, you always got to look deeper into the details to see who was polled. And that's going to give you a big idea of what impact it had on what specific groups. Now, that wraps up story number 1. Moving on to story number 2, we have more trade war drama. I don't even know if what I'm going to say in a second is now up to date accurate, because Trump keeps changing his tariff policy seemingly daily, if not hourly. So at the time of recording, he has paused his tariffs on most Mexican products until April 2nd. Once again, that could have changed at the time that this is pushed out, the way he is changing his tariff policy daily. Now, tariffs are set to move forward against China and Canada, and he also has Trump also has the European Unions in his sights. He has mentioned that tariffs will be coming for the EU as well. Just as a reminder, I will continue to mention this. Tariffs, guys, increase prices for the average American. So they are trying to, through these tariffs, increase the price for the average American while pushing through a House bill that would cut taxes for the rich and eliminate programs that would help those most in need. Also, guys, all this trade war drama is not good for the economy because instability is what impacts the economy strongly, or is one of the factors that impacts the economy strongly. So that leads us into story number 3, which the stock market had huge losses really back to back throughout the week. So the S&P 500 hit its lowest mark since early November. And this is important, guys, because about 60% of Americans own stock, and its performance impacts the average American's retirement fund. Also, guys, the stock market also has a lot to do with consumer confidence and consumer willingness to spend. And what we're seeing with Trump's policies is that consumers as a whole are not confident in the state of the economy. Hence, they are not spending as much. So that is not good for the outlook of the economy. Now, moving forward to the 4th story now, we have Musk attempting again a Starship rocket launch, and it once again failed. Now, I want to provide some nuance with this, guys, because space travel is important. It's why we're able to have things like cell phones, satellite, communications, all of that. But we need to debate how much money goes to space travel, how it's being allocated, and when we have so many immediate problems on this planet, a lot of times certain space travel exploration seems a little unnecessary to the average person. In this case, my also focus here is he has received at least $18 billion in federal contracts. So guys, when you see those rocket ships exploding, that is our taxpayer money just exploding and falling into the ocean. So as he is trying to cut wasteful, quote unquote, programs from the government, he is simultaneously benefiting from our tax money in the government nonstop. I want to remind everyone, if you want to identify waste and truly help with the budget, you need to look up to the top, not down to the bottom. That is a slick politician trick they do endlessly. Oh, it's the, poor immigrant or poor communities who are the welfare recipients who are causing all of these problems. Guys, that is ridiculous. The top 1% through subsidies, through bailouts, constantly pillage our government and benefit from our tax dollars. So it's more about how the tax dollars are being spent. And it seems that it is being spent on the richest, and the government is working very fine for them, even if our taxpayer money literally explode, or not literally, but symbolically explodes in the air. Now, last but not least, our 5th story we're going to look at is the Target boycotts. I think, guys, is a really important story to track because it's showing the power of the dollar amongst the average consumer. And right now, guys, Target is hurting significantly, and it is not a good time to be hurting with the tariffs also in play. So what I am learning from this is the way we are spending our dollars, and this has always been true, but even more so in our capitalistic society, really, really matters. I don't think it mattered, or I think it matters more now, let me say that, than it did previously. So it's not going to be perfect every time, guys, and I won't be perfect every time. I don't expect you guys to be perfect every time in the way you are spending your dollar. But even some changes can have significant impacts, and we are seeing that with the Target boycotts. Now, that wraps up our 5 stories of the week. We are going to move into our now chunk of the episode where I am going to break down and unpack income inequality in the United States. In this episode, we will be taking a look at the state of income inequality in the United States, which is different than wealth inequality. So wealth inequality is your total amount of assets, whereas income inequality is how much you are taking in. Now, although these are different, there is a symbiotic relationship. So you may hear me talk about wealth in taxing, for instance, the wealthy as a way to combat income inequality. But I do want to mention the two are different. And my main focus is going to be on how much people are actually getting paid, not necessarily their total amount of wealth. And we are going to do that by starting with the Reagan era. We're going to look at a Supreme Court case called Citizens United. We're then going to look at the Republican budget bill that they are proposing. We're going to finish then with the myth of meritocracy, myth of meritocracy. And then we're going to talk about some solutions to combat income inequality. All right, so let's take our time machine and let's rewind back to the early 80s, late 70s. Now, in the 70s, the minimum wage was still steadily increasing. But when the 80s came in late 70s, early 80s, minimum wage began to stagnate and many factory jobs started to get outsourced or automated. Now, this is the era when Reagan came in and he won the election first in 1980, but then was also reelected in 1984. And what you can see from this electoral college map is a lot of red. Reagan was really, really popular, but it had somewhat to do with the opposing party of the time and Walter Mondale just not being very electable for the time. So you have a level of popularity with Reagan and then honestly a pretty weak Democratic nominee at the time that led to this electoral map. Now, Reagan is well known and celebrated amongst the present day, modern day Republican Party due largely to his tax cuts, his deregulation, and other policies, guys, that overwhelmingly benefit the rich, okay? He is a president that overwhelmingly paved the path for the exploding income inequality we see today. So although Republicans laud over Reagan, he is one of the chief organizers for our income inequality. So if you are upset that you're getting paid so low compared to CEOs, the Tax Act of 1981 under Reagan has a lot to do with it. So that Tax Act of 1981, it lowered the top tax rate. So the richest people were paying 70% of their taxes, and guess what? They were doing fine. And they lowered it to 50%. So they slashed taxes for the richest by 20%. And they also reduced the marginal tax rate by 23%. Now, kind of fast forwarding, they even did additional cuts in 86, where the top income bracket went from that 50% number down all the way to 28%. So the goal of this, what it's called trickle-down economics or supply-side economics, was this idea, this fairy tale, I like to call it, that you can stimulate economic growth by cutting taxes for the wealthy, so for the rich, and that would spur economic growth, and eventually that money would trickle down to the plebe. So that is me and you, that is the working class. It was basically like an Oliver Twist, like, please, sir, give me more. We give all the money to the rich, and then hope eventually they care enough to trickle that down to us and pay us more. Now, if you're listening to this, you probably know that did not happen whatsoever, because that's not what happens historically if you give tax cuts to the richest people. So this idea would have been nice if, CEOs and corporations would have invested a large percent in those tax cuts and that newfound wealth into their workforce, right? But that's not what happened. Instead, what happened with these tax cuts is many corporations began investing more in CEO pay, while limiting and stagnating the wages, of their what they like to call lower skill labor, while also participating in stock buybacks. So let's talk about the CEO pay first. And these numbers, guys, are staggering. From 1978 to 2021, CEO pay, so the elite upper echelon pay, has rose by nearly 1,500%. So 1,500%, like the richest people's pay has increased, okay? The average employee, so probably you listening, me, an average employee, most of the middle class, the pay has only rose over that same period of time by 18%. So I'm going to say that one more time. The richest CEO pay has increased by 1,500%, whereas everyone else, the average employee pay has only rose by 18%. So those tax cuts did not trickle down to everyone. They stayed at the top. Also, corporations began participating in stock buybacks, which are basically buying back shares of your own company. Now, why would companies do it? It reduces the number of outstanding shares out there. And it basically, guys, long story short, it artificially inflates the value of these stocks. So your corporation becomes more valuable to the stockholders by participating in these stock buybacks, okay? But who generally owns shares of companies? The rich, right? And the rich own the most shares. Who is also in the positions to manipulate the market at this level to benefit themselves? The rich. So ultimately, guys, these tax cuts and these stock buybacks and the increase of CEO pay, the rich just got richer through exploiting this tax cut. And we, the average worker, did not gain the benefits that were promised to us in this fairy tale. Now, I want to caution you guys because this is what the Trump administration is attempting to do right now. Reagan also cut many government programs and regulations that help the poor and working class to help pay for the tax cuts for the rich. That's exactly what's going on in our government now, guys, in 2025. They're trying to find different areas of waste and fraud, regardless if it is actual waste or fraud. They don't particularly care about, or they're not doing the level of due diligence to figure that out. They are just cutting programs that help people so that they can find money to give tax breaks to the richest people. That's what's happening. That's what happened under Reagan. Now, Reagan also, guys, is another terrible thing he did. He also altered the Sherman Antitrust Act, which aimed to limit monopolies. So his editing of that act, I think it was Article 2, if I'm not mistaken, is part of the reason why we are under corporate rule. It's part of the reason why we don't have as many small businesses anymore, and there are huge corporations taking over everything, is Reagan gutted a large part of that Antitrust Act, which would have prevented that. So ultimately, these policies did lead to GDP growth. I'm not going to argue with that. But it did not lead to wage increases for the average worker proportionate to the amount of money or GDP growth that was happening. So that trickle down did not happen to the workers. It stayed concentrated at the top. And I also wanted to add, although his stated goal was to cut government spending, the tax cuts, for the rich only ballooned the deficit, similar to what we saw when Bush cut taxes and Trump cut taxes. When you cut taxes for the rich, it leads to income inequality, and ultimately it leads to the deficit ballooning. Now, ultimately, guys, these two charts that I'm going to show you, I'm going to start with this one, just showing how much income has grown for the top 1%, and particularly that top 0.01%, and how the bottom 20%, so a lot of the working class, it has just remained stagnant. Then this next chart, it's a productivity chart. So what you guys can see here is although we as workers have been more productive, meaning our output has been better over time, our pay has not matched that increased productivity. So really what I'm looking at with Reagan in terms of economics is his long-lasting legacy is cutting taxes and cutting regulations that allowed money to be transferred overwhelmingly from the bottom to the top. And I think a lot of the data that I just shared with you guys really demonstrates that. But I do, as always, encourage you guys to do more research on your own. Now, we are going to move forward to talk about a Supreme Court case that exacerbates income inequality, which was Citizens United versus the FEC, which was in 2010. And in my opinion, guys, is one of the worst Supreme Court rulings that I've seen in my lifetime regarding campaign finance laws. And this is a huge reason why we cannot get our income inequality back into balance, and why no matter whether it is Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden, or Trump again, income inequalities just continues to spike. So in this 5-4 ruling, the Supreme Court found that corporations were considered people because they were a collection of people, and therefore should be able to donate as much money as they want, because money donated from corporations is now considered speech. Now, guys, corporations are not people. Okay? Think of Disneyland. Do you think of Disneyland as a person? Do you think of Coca-Cola as a person? Like, any business can be a small business. Guys, corporations are not people. Just because people are needed to run the corporation does not make a corporation a person. But the Supreme Court somehow ruled in 5-4 that corporations were people. Corporations, guys, are just machines aimed to maximize profit. That's why they are designed. It is, in fact, like law that if your company or corporation is publicly traded, you have a responsibility to your stockholders to maximize profit basically at all costs. So the idea that these corporations have emotions, feelings, and are people like me and you is asinine. But that is the law we currently live under. So if you're always asking yourself, why does it feel like we don't operate in a democracy? It's because we don't. A vast majority of our elected representatives, and it honestly, for the most part, doesn't matter if they're Democrats or Republicans. They are just bought off by the rich. They are bought off by corporations. And you can see this, guys, by finance or the campaign contributions. So you guys can see this, but most of our politicians, guys, serve the donors who give them the most money. They don't serve me or you. So that's why something like paid family leave can be so universally popular, but like it's not getting passed because the donors don't want it, okay? Keep in mind what we have with our current president right now, guys. Elon Musk basically purchased the presidency for $277 million, right? That is what we live under. We live under corporate rule, and until Citizens United is overturned, I feel like it's going to be very difficult to have a functioning government that works for the average American, because best believe we have a functioning government now. You guys may not think it's functioning, but it's just functioning for the rich. And that's the inherent problem we have, is the government does work. It's just not working for us. And the solution is not to destroy it. The solution is to go and fix some of the problems that exist. Now, one of the biggest problems with Citizen United too, guys, is money wins elections. You can see from 2010 to 2024, overwhelmingly in the House and Senate, the candidate who spent more ended up winning. And you can see in 2024 in the House, 94% of the time, the person who spent more money won the election. So money is just buying elections. And that's what we have in the United States. Also, guys, think about this. Citizens United and how our government is set up is incentivizing the wrong people to run for office, right? We are encouraging, or the way it's set up, it encourages people who want to get rich from donors to run for the office. Because, guys, being in the U.S. Senate or House or a politician, it can be a quick way to increase your net worth. So we have a lot of politicians, unfortunately, they aren't running, guys, to serve their constituents. Once again, they're running to enrich themselves and serve, ultimately, their donors. Now, moving forward now, we are going to take a look at the Republican budget bill. So I'm going to bring up a little screenshot here, and you're going to be able to see who is going to be benefiting most from this proposal. So this Republican budget bill has not yet been fully passed, and it has not been enacted yet, but it borrows a lot from the Reagan era policies. And if there's one thing I know about Republican leadership, as I have studied it over my my lifetime, is one thing they will get passed is tax cuts for the rich. Everything else can be a distraction they don't really care about necessarily, but they will get their tax cut. So although this has not passed yet, I would be completely shocked if this does not get passed. Now, what you can see from this image here is basically this tax plan will cost the lower middle working class more, and it will save a bunch of money for those who are the richest amongst us. That is Republican strategy, guys, 101. That is how they believe often the government should function. To accomplish these tax breaks, what they're trying to do, as I mentioned earlier, they are trying to eliminate programs similar to what Reagan did that are safety nets that help the average American, and they're trying to cut those and then funnel the money up to the top. This, guys, has already been researched. It was already done in Reagan. It does not work. That money does not trickle down to us. All this budget bill is going to do, it's going to make the rich already richer, okay? And it's going to increase the amount of income inequality, okay? That's what tax cuts for the rich ultimately end up doing. Now, I don't know why they are focused on this, because right now, and this is going up, the 1% own over 30% of the wealth in the United States. So they do not need any more help. Okay, the rich in this country are doing perfectly fine. So if you are someone who's kind of supporting this activity, understand if you are an average American, it's going to hurt you. It is going to benefit them. Okay. Now I want to transfer forward or move forward and talk a little bit about the myth of meritocracy. So this idea that if you just work really hard, that you can make it and you can achieve. Now, what I want to preface this by saying, if you work hard, you are more likely to succeed than someone who doesn't. But the lie is in the fact that if you work hard, it will inevitably work out for you, and that you working harder than someone else means you will benefit. We know, guys, that is not true. Come on. We know you get places based on who you know, based on who mom and dad are, right? How much money they were able to give you growing up, how much support they were able to give you. That is a huge determinant in your success long term. Another harm with this myth of meritocracy that I don't think people talk about enough is not just the, financial implications, but the mental implications and societal implications. What the myth of meritocracy leads to is it leads to people who are wealthier or richer believing they automatically earned it, right? And then people who don't have that same wealth accumulation inherently didn't earn it, okay? And what that leads to is a lot of societal rage, because to tell someone working 80 hours a week to support their family that they're not working hard enough, you guys can think how that's going to work, right? It also, those who merited it, meaning those who are rich, they often are unable then to reflect on what got them there. And instead are like, oh, I just worked harder than everyone. That's how I became, the richest person in the world, or whatever it may be. That is not the case. This has actually been studied, guys, and where the United States currently is, it's actually harder to move up economically or socially now than many other European countries. So this idea that America is the best country to go to in terms of moving up in the financial hierarchy of society, that isn't true anymore. The American dream, guys, is not the same it used to be in the 70s, 60s, 50s, whatever, where, a single payer household could go, you could buy a house, your family could be taken care of. That is not the reality we live in. And one of my fears is this myth of meritocracy that some people still believe in is contributing to more income inequality, because basically people are saying, oh, I didn't earn it, so I deserve this much. And that rich person obviously worked hard and earned it, so they deserve that much. Guys, that's not how it works. If you are thinking that, please stop thinking that. People who make more money than you aren't inherently better than you. They didn't inherently merit it. Often they're trust funds, or they were given situations, or they got breaks in life that you didn't. okay? But please, if you're an average American, break out of this myth of meritocracy. Not every rich person in society inherently earned it. That is not true. And I hope you guys know that. I encourage you to kind of prove this point. Google some of the richest people in the world and figure out their actual journey, how they got their startup money and how they got to where they're at. And you would be surprised at time after time. It's not a situation where you built yourself up from the ground. It was often, I got a few $1,000,000 donated for the startup or so on and so forth. So we really need to attack that myth of meritocracy. I think that would help tremendously in kind of addressing income inequality. And that ultimately leads to the last part of this podcast, which are solutions. Solutions to me are the most important part. We can talk about this, dissect it, and it's important to do so we know how to address the problems. But ultimately, guys, we need solutions. And one of the first things, we need to raise the minimum wage. The minimum wage has not been raised, I believe, since 2009. We're in 2025. Think how much the landscape has changed financially from the 2000s to the 2020s, right? Yet the minimum wage has not increased. We did have a vote under the Biden administration. And I want to actually play a clip from you because this is a Democrat at the time, Kyrsten Sinema, doing some performative nonsense when voting on the minimum wage. I think that is one of the most important political clips in recent memory. And you're like, what? Why? Because I think it speaks so much to what our politicians think their job is, right? There, she stands up, she does this performative metric, and we are talking about, guys, people living on $7.25 an hour. That is our current minimum wage. So imagine you're trying to raise a family and there's this vote on you not having to live in ridiculous levels of poverty, and your representative goes up there kind of giggling, you know, she's fine financially, she doesn't really care, and does this performative thumbs down. It's one of the most disgusting things I've seen, but it also speaks, guys, to what our politicians think of us largely, and they just don't care. They don't care because a lot of their policies do not impact, or the policies that they're voting on don't impact them. And we unfortunately have far too many people in our government who think that way. But that was a very important clip to show you. Luckily, she is no longer in office. And I also want to note she was not the only Democrat to vote again. Think about that, guys. Raising the minimum wage from $7.25 an hour to $15. Almost every Republican voted no. So keep that in mind if you're a Republican voter. They don't think your wages should be higher. Okay, if you want to vote for that, sure. And then 8 Democrats voted against it, including Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, who was a big headache in the Democratic policy his entire time Biden was in office in those 4 years. So minimum wage, guys, increase would obviously help address income inequality. I would propose at least $15 an hour, the same vote that they voted on under Biden, because, guys, 15 is the minimum. I would be okay going higher, but every person should be able to pay their bills and live a life of dignity if they are working, right? And we are at a state in the country, we have a bunch of people working, putting in the effort, but they're not able to live, which is why we have such a high homeless population. Now, this cannot be implemented. So if they did increase minimum wage, it would have to be rolled out over a period of time. And you would need to subsidize or help smaller businesses pay for it. I do not care about the larger businesses. You guys can pay for that and should be held accountable. But there could also be something in place to limit, like if you have 100 or more employees, or have different kind of levels for payment. But ultimately, guys, the government can subsidize small business to help achieve this. So minimum wage increase would also help increase the wages of people not making minimum wage. And let me, explain this to you. So say you have an employee making $10 an hour and they're the lowest level employee, but now the minimum wage was raised to 15 and they're making 15 an hour. But say you were making 12 an hour, right? And now you're on the same level of that lowest paid employee. your pay would also have to go up to compensate for the fact now that the lowest level employees are getting paid more. So guys, a wage increase helps everyone. It brings everyone's wages up. So I think that is the most direct way to address this, but it's not all encompassing. Other things I would do. You got to end Citizens United, guys. I don't honestly know the path forward for that. I know there are some politicians like Bernie Sanders who would vote to end that immediately. But honestly, until we get more educated about who we're voting for and we vote out politicians who are getting donations from super PACs, it is going to be very difficult to find a majority of Congress who is willing to vote to end a system that's inherently benefiting them. Okay? And to that point, I would also eliminate stock trading. And I'm going to play another video. This happens to be another Democrat, guys, because I am not beholden to Democrats or Republicans. I am beholden to policy. And this is Nancy Pelosi when she was asked about publicly trading, stocks while you are serving in government.
Insider just completed a 5-month investigation finding that 49 members of Congress and 182 senior congressional staffers have violated the Stock Act, the insider trading law. I'm wondering if you have any reaction to that, and secondly, should members of Congress and their spouses be banned from trading individual stocks while serving in Congress?
No, I don't know to the second one. We have a responsibility to report in the stock, on the stock, but I'm not familiar with that 5-month review, but if people aren't reporting, they should be. Because this is a free market and we're a free market economy. They should be able to participate in that.
I think this, once again, to go along with the Kirsten Sinema clip, guys, this just shows what our representatives think of us. They think that they can use the government and their policies to enrich themselves, and that's perfectly fine, when in reality, guys, these elected officials are supposed to be in roles of service. And if you cannot survive off your 100 plus your 6-figure salary as a public servant, then do something else. And also don't complain about not being able to participate and enrich yourself when the minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. Okay? The hypocrisy and the ridiculousness that these politicians do is mind-boggling. It is mind-boggling, but it works. Enough people fall for it. Now, the eliminating of publicly trading stocks has been proposed multiple times. But once again, guys, the current elected people or representatives benefit from the system. So until we primary these people, get out, vote out people like Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, so on and so forth, we're going to be stuck in the system because they're not going to vote against it. Okay? Now, last but not least, my final solution. So I talked about raising the minimum wage, addressing Citizens United, and stop trading so that our elected representatives are not corrupted by donors. The last thing, guys, I know this is said over and over again, we have to tax the rich more. Guys, the rich in this country have so much money, they don't know what to do with it. Literally, they don't know what to do. So what they're doing is they're just buying up all the assets that they can. Why can you not afford a house? It's because a rich person comes in with a $500,000 cash offer because they just have that money laying around and they're going to spend it accumulating assets. So until we fix our tax code, which the Republican Party is going to slide us further back and not closer to fixing this, we need to tax the rich and eliminate tax loopholes and different ways that the rich manipulate the tax code to benefit themselves. So for instance, passive income, guys, this is a big one. The richest people among us gets hundreds of millions of dollars in passive income from doing absolutely nothing, just from their asset accumulation. Like if you, for instance, if you're rich, uber rich, and you buy a sports team, that sports team is going to make money regardless of if you win or not, generally speaking, right? So you have all of this other passive income, and once again, that is put back into accumulating assets. So we can also raise the marginal tax rate and focus on taxing wealth instead of taxing income, okay? A lot of the richest people amongst us, guys, they report zero earnings on income, so they don't have any income tax, or they report very little relative to how much money they have. They then hide their wealth in things like paintings and different assets that are tax-free. So that allows so many who are rich amongst us to pay less than their fair share. So by eliminating those loopholes, more of that money, guys, can be taxed and invested back into the government. And if the government is functioning, which we're a long way from this, but if it does get to a place where it works from the average day American, that money can benefit us all. And guys, even if it didn't benefit us, if the rich were just taxed and that money was set ablaze like the Joker, that would still bring down income inequality, because now the richest people are not buying up everything, or at least it would address wealth inequality, okay? So, solutions here. Raise the minimum wage. That is long overdue. We need to end Citizens United, eliminate stock trading by our elected representatives, and ultimately, guys, we need to tax the rich more, okay? Now, that wraps up the main part of this podcast. Let's finish with doing some shout-outs of the week. And my shout-outs of the week go to Democrats fighting back. Voters do not like capitulating. We do not like seeing our elected representatives sit on their hand, particularly at such important historical moment in time. So, Democrats, Al Green, I mentioned him earlier in the pod. He was the one who stood up during Trump's speech. Love that. We need more of that. Michelle Wu and Ayanna Pressley. I also want to shout out those two ladies. They were pressed at a meeting on immigrants or immigration and sanctuary cities, and both of them pushed back on the Republican talking points of immigrants and crime by basically stating, okay, if you want to make things safer, immigrants are not the one causing crime. So let me play both of these clips back to back and give these ladies their due flowers.
We're the ones that have that. We just heard we want a comprehensive immigration policy. How can you get a comprehensive immigration policy when you're defining it from the very get-go? You're building it on false premises and false tenets.
Respectfully, Congressman, you could pass bipartisan legislation, and that would be comprehensive immigration law. The false narrative is that immigrants in general are criminals, or immigrants in general cause all sorts of danger and harm. That is actually what is undermining safety in our communities. If you wanted to make us safe, pass gun reforms. Stop cutting Medicaid. Stop cutting cancer research. Stop cutting funds for veterans. That is what will make our city safe.
I'll do this as a survivor of sexual violence myself. This is from Courts, March 2018.
Without objection, so ordered.
Data from Texas shows that U.S.-born
Without objection, so ordered. We've put it in the record.
I haven't entered it.
You have what?
Mr. Chair, can I have several articles. I need to enter them. Let me just go ahead with what the articles are. What they speak to.
What's the next article?
Let me proceed. Data from Texas shows that U.S.-born Americans commit more rape and murder than immigrants.
Listen, this trend of you all trying to get thrown out of committee so you can get on MSNBC is going to end. We're not going to put up with it.
This is my procedural right as a member of this committee.
You can go with Mr. Frost and Mr. Green.
I'm reclaiming my time.
Democrats, more of that. I love it. Fight back. We need you. We voted you. You're our representatives. If you just sit there, you are failing the American people. So step up and represent us the way Al Green has, the way Michelle Wu has, and the way Ayanna Pressley has in that video. And you will earn our votes. And you will earn the votes of a lot of Americans you may not think you would have previously. So that wraps up, guys, episode number 3, where I took on income inequality. I unpacked how we got to where we're at and maybe some potential solutions heading forward to put things more in a balance. So let me know what you think below in the comments. Do all the like, subscribe, share, all of those things. And let's get these conversations going. Is there another way you think you can address income inequality that I didn't mention? Did a strategy that I mentioned, you don't think that's the right way to go? Anything, whatever you guys think, please put it below. But for now, I am TJacks, and I just finished unpacking income inequality in the United States.